Welcome to the hexdevs podcast, where we interview the best developers across the globe so that we can help you become a better developer.
Amed Rodriguez, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So you're a software engineer working at LANDesk right now,
That's right.
and you're from Mexico, right?
Correct.
Can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, your background?
Sure. So I am a software engineer, and I've been working professionally over 10 years now. And pretty much what I have been doing is web development and in between entrepreneurship.
So, what sort of technologies do you have more experience with? And what technologies do you also enjoy most?
Because most of the time I've been working with Ruby as my primary programming language, and back in the days I used to do more front end HTML, JavaScript, CSS, but in the last few years I've been more focused on back-end development, and also have a little bit of experience with Elixir more recently.
What made you switch a little bit to backend? Was it more of a personal choice or more professional?
No, it wasn't a explicit choice. I guess just the circumstances. Back then, when the architecture of applications started splitting into backend and frontend, and no, there was no special reason actually. Like I was doing sort of full stack, but then it felt like too much. So things got me more into backend, and I don't regret that. I really like that more now.
So you said like when things started like splitting between front end and back end, you kind of chose back end. And is that because React started, or is it just like a personal preference?
No, yeah, it actually was before React even existed. Like, okay, so most of my experience is with Ruby on Rails. So back in the days, you will have everything in the same application, including the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then Backbone JS came up, and after that, Angular, Ember.js. So I started working with those. And then first they were still within the same application, but at some point we started like having two actual separate applications.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you said that you were also doing some entrepreneurship back in Mexico, I guess?
Yeah, pretty much.
So you co-founded a software development shop focused on agile product development, lean startup, right?
Right.
So how was the change from being a developer, like an employee, and then becoming a lead developer, like leading other developers, helping them, coaching them, mentoring them, and like having to think about managing a project or like thinking about revenue? So why did you decide to start a company?
Yeah, good question. It was, okay, something that wasn't planned, but the circumstances. So back then, I had a full-time job as a software developer, and I don't remember why I started taking into freelance gigs like in my spare time, like at night. And yeah, probably was because Ruby on Rails was pretty demanded. So I started getting requests from people in the United States to work remotely, and I started like as a side thing. It went well. Eventually I quit my job and started doing like full-time freelancing. But soon after that, I I transitioned I was more explicit from a solo person to a actual company. So I created the legal entity and all that kind of thing, and invited a friend to join as a partner. So both of us took it from there, and then we started hiring other developers. And since we were running the business, for me at least, it was very important to always have like the client expectations very clear. So for that, you need techniques to manage the projects, right? So we were pretty heavily invested in Agile and pretty much Agile methodologies, extreme programming. We use those techniques to manage the scope of the projects, the pricing as well, and to have the client involved in all the process.
How many developers did you end up hiring at the time?
It was always since the beginning, we had the idea of keeping things simple. And as many people, I was very influenced by 37 Signals back then and all the philosophy they have behind with their first book, Getting Real.
Yeah.
And so I always had the idea to keep things simple, so that we were able to choose like the clients, the projects we wanted to work on. And so to answer your question, at the peak it was like 7 people, but it was a mixture of designers, developers, and operations people.
And all of them were working remotely as well?
No, we had like a physical location in Monterrey, Mexico, but most of our clients were either in the States or in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And how would you get the clients? So you started freelancing. So how did that happen? Like how did you get your first client, for example?
My very first client, I signed up in a Rails developers directory, something like that, and he contacted me through that page, and we started from there. Like he had like a small gigs, and then he invited me to work on another startup. He was a co-founder, and from there I introduced like my agency, worked with more developers, and that was pretty much our first client.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
And did you also work with other clients? Like, did you have like a bunch of clients at the same time?
No, since we were pretty much a small team, we usually had 2 to 3 projects at the same time. At some point, we took like a strategy of traveling often to San Francisco, and like to do public relationships and networking in general. So the first trip we did was back in 2012, and it was my business partner and I, and both of us had never been there, nor close to Silicon Valley, but we had heard good things about it. And so we planned to go, like we invested like $5,000 in that trip. We were there for about a month, and but that was it. Like we're gonna invest this money, which was basically all we had in the bank, and let's see what happens. So we went there. I fired like 30 emails before landing, very randomly, like to some startups, to some agencies as well that were doing something similar to us. And very surprisingly, most of them replied and even, but more importantly, invited us to have a coffee or something like that. So, yeah, that was the first trip we did, and started meeting a lot of people. It's a really, really special city. I remember we felt like one day there felt like 3 days in our city. Like everything moves pretty fast. And we were from one meeting to another. People is extremely friendly, extremely open to meet new people. And still we had some trouble selling the idea of, look, we are here now, but we eventually gonna go back and work remotely. That's the idea. It was hard to sell that, but eventually, like the very last week we were there, we got the first client and came back to Mexico. And after a couple weeks, months, we had the return of the initial investment and much more than that.
Well, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And so you think that it's a good idea, like if you have a small agency or if you're doing some freelancing, do you think it's a good idea to like send some emails to people and maybe like go to San Francisco and try to find some clients? Like how would you approach that situation? Like, I need more clients. What should I do?
Well, that worked for us back in 2012. I don't know if I will do the same nowadays. Yeah, like I'm thinking back, and I guess it was a mixture of luck and persistence, because since we were specialized in Ruby on Rails, it was like a very demanded technology. But over the years, the offer has been more big, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, actually, I remember the last years of the agency, I started like having more competition with teams in India and Ukraine and other countries from Middle East, just because people was already learning that technology.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I had a similar experience in Brazil. So me and a couple of friends, we started a company in São Paulo, and the startup scene was just starting out in São Paulo. And so we had the chance to like work with some really cool companies and startups and be part of the startup community in São Paulo.
Was it remotely too? Remotely?
No, we had a little office in a co-working space, and then we would get clients there. Like you just go to the co-work, you talk to everyone, and eventually you get like 2-3 projects just by talking to people at a co-working space. But back then, like we weren't even using Ruby on Rails or anything. We were doing C#. And then eventually we started adopting Ruby on Rails because this was kind of getting popular. And I wish that I had done that earlier. Like I wish that I started doing Ruby earlier, because for an agency or a small company, like it's so much more productive. Like when you're doing Rails compared to other stuff at the time. So yeah, it would have been much easier for us because we were like struggling with like finishing the projects and we had a bunch of stuff going on.
Which year was it?
It was 2013, 2014.
Okay.
Yeah. So it took a long time to. So in Brazil, I think Ruby on Rails started out maybe in 2014. So it took a little while to get there, but yeah. Now there's a huge community in Brazil. But so getting back to your company, so what about your co-founder? Was she? Was he a developer too, or?
Yeah, pretty smart guy. He was a bit younger than me, and he was studying at the time. So he eventually had to leave the company because we were having like too much demand and too much work. So he started like having trouble at school, and because of personal reasons, he decided to focus only on school.
Mm-hmm.
So I run the agency for the last year and a half, I think. Yeah.
Was it hard to be the boss, the only person there?
No, it was pretty much the same. His role was more on supporting the other engineers. It was like a more technical lead, and I was focused on the rest, like networking, hiring, training, selling, and finance. Well, I didn't do finance, like we had an accountant, but still like pricing the projects, negotiating our rates, and eventually like moving forward the projects.
And so one thing that I struggled with when I was starting my company with my co-founders was that I wasn't like really mature enough for that kind of stuff. Like I had to struggle with like the way you present yourself, because I used to be like a very shy person.
Yeah.
And then I wouldn't be able to like sell stuff, and then I had to learn that really quickly, and then like how to mentor people, how to like talk to people. So that was like super hard for me, but then I learned a lot. So did you struggle with something when you started your company? Did you have something that you had to like change or do?
Yeah, well, definitely I'm also more introvert. But yeah, it wasn't too awkward. What we tried was like just being more present in the ecosystem, first locally, and then before we expanded to Silicon Valley. But it was pretty much more about being present at events or local meetups or conferences, and just hanging around, like meeting people, meeting potential clients. The co-working strategy, something like that as well. But no, I guess everything went pretty organically, so I don't recall at this point struggling with something like that.
That's good.
Yeah. I think if you had struggled, you would remember.
Yeah.
Like if you had struggled a lot.
Yeah, like it to me, like because my co-founders, they wanted to like grow a lot fast, like faster and faster, and I was more like you said, like the guys from 37 Signals.
Right.
I wanted to like grow organically and maybe like do the right things, and then like write good code and deliver a good experience to the client. I wasn't really like into the idea of like VC funded startup, like you need to grow a lot faster. Massive expansion. So that's something that like we were at odds a little bit. So it was one of my struggles there. And then I believe you also founded a startup, and then you went to San Francisco. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so that journey took me there. So for the same reasons you mentioned, at some point after 4 years of running the agency, like I started like thinking, what are the next steps, right? So we were about 6 to 7 people, and we were doing well in terms of revenue and all that, and recognition from either from potential clients as well as from people that wanted to join the team to work. So like I have a weird question, like questioned myself. I asked myself, is this what you want to do? What you want to do in the next 3 years? If you see yourself in the future, you see yourself doing this? And the answer was not. So, and I guess the reason was because having all these duties that are not technical, that were pulling me away from doing actual coding and software engineering, all these duties, it was like the trade-off of growing the business and managing the business. So that at the end, I didn't like that. And I make the choice of like whatever it takes so that I can just focus on technical problems. And I spoke with my team about this, and they were like, they completely understood my points, and we started planning like a wind down process for the agency with them and with the ongoing projects. So that still took a few months, but once I was done with that, like a friend was telling me about an idea he had, and he was already working on, which is this company you mentioned, NimboX, and he's running a software company focused on healthcare in Mexico, and this company is been running for, I believe, over a decade. So it's a well-established company in Mexico, and it's basically like a family business. And they were incubating a new project, which is this one. And so he invited me to join as a technical co-founder. And I liked the idea because we had some sort of like a money to run the business from this parent company, but at the same time we have more flexibility to build the product from the beginning in our entire terms. So we started that project like they had the conception of it, but I helped them build the B1 of the product. And at some point, we decided to apply to Y-Combinator. Back then, we were if I'm correct, we were the first ones to go to Y-Combinator interview, at least in our city, in Monterrey. And there was no other Mexican startup being incubated in Y-Combinator. So we were pretty excited the day we got the email that when they were inviting us to Mountain View to do the on-site interview. And it was after a few months of having launched the product. And so we went there a couple days before. We were preparing, very stressed. You don't get, but if you find an intern and ask around, you will get like 50, 100 questionnaires of things that they might ask you. So we were training between us, like asking us random questions that could come up in the interview. And so yeah, the day came, and we were interviewed by, at the time, it was I don't remember the name, but it was the CFO, Christine, I guess is her name, and the COO, and another guy who's the CTO of ScriptD. I don't know if you You probably have seen that.
Yeah, I know that.
Something with
app.
PDFs and online documents.
Mm-hmm.
So they were the ones that interviewed us. I was pretty nervous, more than them, and more than my co-founders. And at the end, we got a no. Like, I guess it was the same date, but you walk away from there without knowing. Like, they say we're gonna speak about it, etc. And
do you get it right away?
No, it was night. The worst time because we could not sleep after. Yeah, we got an email saying that from this guy Jared, the co-founder of Scriptd. Basically, their reasons were, we don't believe you have at this point a clear differentiator for competing in the US industry, which is completely true because the healthcare industry in the US is pretty competitive, like probably like in no other country.
Yeah.
And we weren't prepared for targeting the US market at that point. So yeah, we definitely was a pretty good feedback, and then we started like thinking new ways what we could do, new ways to experiment with the product and with the direction of the product. Eventually, like the parent company started putting more pressure on our team, and the top down, they took a decision of going through a more traditional path. So that's when I used that inflection point to part ways with them. So I continued with my plan of focusing on technical challenges. As a consultant, you are very limited in terms of, especially if you are charging by the hour. Like your clients doesn't want you messing around trying to figure out the obscure bug unless you were hired for that, but usually you won't, and you will have like a pretty limited visibility of the entire scope of a product, right? So my theory was like, if on my own I join teams, I can have that visibility and I can work long term or medium term in a single product, focusing on single problems, and more importantly, seeing the evolution of the product, living the evolution. Because as a consultant, you are just jumping around from project to project. And in my consultancy, we were very focused on taking products from 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1, but never saw things beyond. So that's what I wanted to explore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have a curiosity about Y-Combinator. So were you planning to get accepted and get funding and then expand into the US market? Was that like the most important thing for the company at the time? Or was that just like a way to maybe expand the company and see what would happen?
No, it wasn't the plan. So I guess it was mostly about living the experience of being incubated in Y-Combinator, which at the time, I don't know nowadays, but was the most prestigious accelerator in the world.
Yeah.
So we didn't plan to apply to anywhere else like Techstars or whatever. We only tried with Y-Combinator. If it didn't work, it's okay. We still are in business, right? But we didn't need money at the time. It wasn't a matter of money. still you don't get too much money from them unless you raise after the graduation. But no, it wasn't too much about that.
Was the startup profitable in any way at the time, or were you just like building the product?
No, it wasn't at the time. Like we just had like a few months of having launch, and we had a bunch of customers, but basically on a free trial. So, but still, since we had the support of the parent company, we still had time to runway.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, there was not much urgency in money.
And then after that, you decided to move to San Francisco?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I decided to move. I wasn't able to. So in Monterey, since I had been in contact with companies from San Francisco since years before, this time I started like actually looking for a job, not selling myself as a consultant or anything like that. I was actually wanting to be hired. So I did a few interviews from Monterey and finally got a job offer from a startup, also in healthcare, but more towards billing. And we made all the arrangements, the salary negotiation, the moving fee, and anything you could need. It was pretty good. It was a pretty good offer, like the dream of software engineering in Silicon Valley. And all I needed was to go ask for the work visa, for the US work visa. So I gathered everything, go to the embassy, and got the visa denied.
That sucks.
Yeah.
So you had the offer, you had everything, but not the visa.
Yeah, imagine I was with my job offer in my hands, literally. Can I please get a job, work visa? And it was denied. Why? Because I didn't have my degree at the time. So there was a pretty gray line in the law because I read the law. I had been studying software engineering back in the days, but eventually dropped out. So the law say that you can get the work visa as long, you don't have to have the entire degree, as long as you have been at least 2 or 3 years studying. So that was a gray line I was playing with. And eventually the officer told me that, no, you need a degree. Okay. So from there, I still got hired by this company, except that I was working remotely most of the time, but I will visit them from time to time. And but I started getting into to solve my degree problem. So it was like going back to school to speak, to see how things, how I left things 10 years ago. And it was a mess, a complete mess. I could not imagine myself sitting in the classroom again. So I started looking for alternatives. Luckily, the Mexican government has a special program for people that has got enough professional experience. It was basically my case. Like I was studying and then I dropped out, but I started working on software engineering. So I have got a few years of experience and proven experience. So this program will allow you to present 2 exams. And if you pass those exams, you will get a degree without having to go to a university.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I definitely went down with that option. And it still took me a year and a half to complete that. It wasn't easy, but way better than going back and sit in the classroom.
Yeah.
So, I finally got the degree last year.
Congrats.
Congrats.
Thank you.
But did you get the visa?
No. It's one of those things that sometimes that you want something and it's your objective, but what was important was the journey, not the destination.
Yeah.
So once I got the degree and I had everything to really move and to San Francisco, by that time I was working for another company, still remotely, and it was just a matter of months for me to get the degree. We had some free time, like I was completely remotely, so I told my wife we should go elsewhere while I wait for my degree. And okay, where? How about Canada? Like, we had never been there, but it's not the US and it's the closest thing we have from Mexico. Okay, which city? I don't know, Toronto, Vancouver. It's the only cities you hear about. And so did a little bit of research, and Vancouver was definitely the option, especially for the proximity to Silicon Valley. So we came here as a visitors, and then we had tickets to Europe like in 6 months to go to here for another few months. And so while being here, I got the call to go pick up my degree. I fly to Mexico, came back, and I started learning about immigration here in Canada. So at that point, the company I was working for got acquired by another company in Boston. And they wanted to move everything to Boston. That was definitely not in my plans. So I used that inflection point to say, okay, you know what? Let's part ways here, and I'm gonna look for a job in Canada and get the Canadian work visa.
That's interesting, but did you still want to go to San Francisco, or you didn't want to go to Boston, or you just said, no, Canada is better, I want to go to Canada now?
Yeah, I mean, San Francisco, it's a very special city, especially for technology, but immigration in the US is pretty hard. So it was more a decision thinking on long term. Like, I could have got the work visa, but it will be for 3-year tops, and then I will have to renew it and be afraid of it being denied for some strange reason. So I didn't want to play that game. And once I learned about how it's in Canada, like with the permanent residency program and all that, I said, you know what, like, I talked with my wife about it. We decided that it's not worth, like, going to the US and eventually they will kick you in the ass and they don't want you there. So you already spent 3 years of your life.
And it's also hard for your partner, right? To get a work permit.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very restrictive. That's another good point. Yeah.
So you came here to visit, and then how was the process of finding the job here, getting the work permit here?
Yeah, it was interesting. So since I was working remotely for the first months, we arrived here. And eventually all this transition happened. And I decided, okay, let's find in the local ecosystem how things are. and I started like, I don't know, maybe AngelList, or I don't recall. Like, there's a Slack group for Vancouver developers. I spoke with a few people there and started getting like interview calls. And I thought, okay, this doesn't seem to be going to be too hard. But surprise was that a lot of companies here were not willing to sponsor work permits. And the sad part of that is that they didn't even know what involved to have that, because for me coming from Mexico, it's much more easier than from other countries because we have the NAFTA trade. Mm-hmm. And it's basically a matter of paying $100 and that's it. You don't have to do the LMIA or anything else. So I got a few hard stops from companies here that, oh, sorry, we don't sponsor permits. No, but look, I'm come from Mexico. It's easier, NAFTA, etc. No, sorry, they were close in that. So eventually find a company that was willing to, and they still did interview rounds with other companies, and it took me about 3 weeks of very intense work between interviews, different rounds, like first like a talking and then coding challenges, etc., etc.
When was it?
I was last year.
Oh, yeah. In your case, did you have to do the LMIA thing, or
no? That doesn't apply for Mexico.
Oh.
So basically, the company had to prove that they try to hire Canadian people first, and do some, like, fill some forms, pay a fee, and that was it. The only thing is that since I was as a visitor here, I had to leave the country and get in again.
Yeah.
And that was funny as well because
did you have to go to the border?
Yeah. I went to Seattle.
Yeah.
Like the shortest thing at the time was, okay, just go to Seattle. In the same day, you come back, and on the entrance, you ask for the work permit. I had all the paperwork already, and it was denied.
What?
Yeah, it was by train. I don't know if you have seen the Amtrak train that takes you from the train station to Seattle, but it goes south till Oregon. But I left in Seattle, and I spent the day there walking around, and then at the night came back, and it was just bad luck because my conclusion was the officers didn't know how to process the work permit at that entry point, which is the station. What's the name? Pacific Center Station or something like that?
On Main Street?
No, it's the Pacific something. It's by Main Street, but
yeah, I think so.
So yeah, they told me, sorry, we are not processing your work permit. You can get in as a visitor, but it's not gonna happen today. You can try any other day you want.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, so 2 days after that, I had to fly to San Francisco. I went to San Francisco, spent a night there, and came back through YRV.
Oh, okay.
And then everything was a completely different story.
It was a better visa office or something.
Yeah. It's been pretty tough, immigration stuff for me.
Yeah. But now, this year, you got your permanent residence.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, it was like another 10 months of intense work, of paperwork, and finally got it.
And so, why did you choose Vancouver again? Did you just randomly pick a city in Canada?
Yeah, no, it wasn't that random, but it was basically between Toronto and Vancouver. And it was something that I didn't put a lot of thought, really, but I don't regret at all, like being here. It was basically the decision points where let's go to a city where there is good public transportation, where there is good tech industry, where there is good beer, where there is good coffee, and where there is nature.
Yeah.
So that's Vancouver.
Yeah, that's Vancouver. Not a lot of snow.
Exactly, not so cold. Yeah, that's another important point.
Yeah, so you kind of lived a little bit in San Francisco, like going there, working there. So how do you compare Mexico, San Francisco, and Vancouver?
Yeah, good question. I've been going to San Francisco at least once a year for the last 7 years. And I have seen or witnessed a cultural transition in the city with the gentrification and all those kind of phenomenons. But I guess you have been there. Have you been there?
No, not yet.
Okay. It's a very special city.
Since the US doesn't like immigrants that much, I also don't plan going there.
Well, that's another thing. Yeah, the US doesn't like immigrants, but San Francisco or Silicon Valley are a very special place.
Well, they should have their own embassy.
Exactly. No, definitely. They should have their own. Yeah,
country,
I agree.
It's like the Vatican inside of Italy.
It could be like the Vatican of tech in the US.
Bay Area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's definitely the place where technology grows and has good and bad things, like everything. But it's a very genuine place for technology. That's the big difference with any other city. In Mexico, I guess we tend to be more followers of what's going on. I'm not a very creative person in terms of having business ideas, but essentially many of the business that exist in Mexico are things that already exist in the US. It's because it's one of the biggest markets in the world and the market that adopts technology faster and many other reasons. But one of my motivations to start moving towards or gravitating around Silicon Valley was because I was in Mexico, like, okay, we are trying to emulate everything. We are trying to be like them. Why I don't go there and live there? You know, that was my decision point, and that's the comparison of my city with San Francisco now. Vancouver, it's like a middle point. Here, you also have more potential of market adoption. The economy in Canada is pretty good. The technology adoption, I guess, as well. And the proximity with Seattle and Portland and San Francisco also helps a lot. The fact of being in the West Coast. So one difference I have noticed in the 18 months I've been here, it's that companies from San Francisco are coming here. Like they are opening satellite offices here or moving headquarters here even. And that's bringing a lot of interesting opportunities to Vancouver.
Yeah, that's very true. And also because there are many developers here. like coming from everywhere, and so they can get a bunch of people here to work for them.
Oh, totally. Yeah, like Canada is taking advantage of really having global talent here. And I guess the United States is too full of people already, but Canada is definitely taking advantage of that for the good. I mean, that's why we are here at the end.
Yeah, that's true.
And do you have any plans on starting another company, but this time in Vancouver or in Canada?
Good
or
question.
A side project?
Yeah, I don't know. When I left my consultancy business, I thought, like I had proved, I guess, to myself that I was capable of running a business and growing a business. And at some point, I sort of lose interest in that. Probably because of the same reasons that I was being dragged to other duties.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, I thought, you know what? I don't care if I am the owner, if I am the boss. I believe more in working with someone else. I don't care if it is my boss, as long as it is the right person. I don't want to be the captain of the ship. Like I felt all the time I was the captain of the ship in my agency, that I no longer wanted to do that. So as long as I am with the right people and that will have the right leadership, I don't mind being the one focused on technical matters. So that was one point, and the other thing, I guess, is that after that I got busy with other stuff besides my daily job. So all the energy you need to make an entrepreneurship, I was burning that energy with paperwork and with getting my degree and then doing all the immigration stuff. So I hadn't had time to think on being again a founder, but like I don't know, probably not. I don't know. You never know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And now you are working at LANDesk.
Yeah.
What are you working on there?
Yeah. Yeah, LANDesk is it's an awesome company. All I have told here about I don't know, combining a lot of things I have lived in my past, and the fact of having good leaders that technically are your bosses, but it doesn't feel like that. And you can be confident they are doing their job at a leadership level and guiding the company, and you can focus on your own thing. That's definitely something that LANDesk has allowed to me and to others. It's a pretty valuable company in that sense. And I am a backend engineer there, and we are pretty much doing Ruby backend. We have a few services in Elixir and some other technologies, Go, Node.js, etc.
And do you feel that you have a lot of autonomy in your work, like to decide on things, or maybe like I want to work on this part of the system, or maybe on that part, or something that I like more, or like, do you have some autonomy there?
Yeah, I just joined a few months ago. I'm still in an exploratory part, but definitely have witnessed how open leadership is to hear your ideas. So probably soon I expect to be working on other areas I am interested on, because one thing is it's pushing forward the company goals with clients and with investors, and like moving forward the daily job. And another important thing is to focus on other exploratory areas where you see opportunities to do your technical stuff.
That's cool. And you worked remotely for a long time, and now I believe you're not working remotely anymore. So how do you compare that experience? Because when you work remotely for like, I don't know, 10 years or something, is it hard to get adjusted to the office again? Or you don't mind?
It wasn't too hard for me. Especially because I guess here I still didn't have the setup at my apartment to work remotely. So at the same time, I wanted to, after being alone, remote, a long time, I wanted to be in a space with more people, like interacting with more people. And I mean, as long as the company has good practices in place, it wasn't a hard transition for me. If they respect your focus time and there are no too many meetings, or I mean, you can have also Slack calls all the time, but also applies for remote work. But no, I'm really enjoying working on site at this point.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
And you talked about focus and like having time to focus on things. So, and then you think that like maybe meetings might be disruptive to your flow.
Yeah.
So how do you try to like maximize that, like that flow state? Do you do something related to that? Like, do you have any ideas related to that?
Yeah. Here it hasn't been a problem at LANDesk, but in the past, what I will do is, if I want, like, I don't know, 4 hours straight of focused work, I will woke up pretty early, like 5, 6 a.m. and start working at that time. And by 9, 10 a.m., that people will start tapping your shoulder. And then you can do any other kind of work, sync with your team, help others, etc. And then in the afternoon, you will have another set of hours of focus work. That's something that worked pretty well for me.
Yeah, that's a good idea. It's a good tip.
Yeah.
So you said you've done some Elixir development in the past.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about Elixir?
Yeah.
Because we love Elixir here.
I love Elixir, yeah. I want to do more work with Elixir. Like, I just touched it for a brief period, but it was enough to see the advantages. Compared with Ruby, it's in general it's a more modern programming language. Like Ruby at this point has a lot of overhead or a lot of weight on his back from the community, from I don't know, how they are planning the future features of the language, and all the controversy with concurrency and other topics. Elixir, it's pretty young in that sense. Like it has very little weight on his back at this point. And the fact that it is a functional language, it's something that really interests me after doing object-oriented programming for so long. And the fact that it's sitting in the shoulders of the giant Erlang, that's also pretty interesting. That it allows you to explore other sort of architectures for web applications.
And do you think that knowing Elixir in 2019 might help you get a job compared to, like you said, in 2012? If you knew Ruby, you would get clients really easily. So do you think that also applies to Elixir right now? Or maybe Go?
I definitely think that it's a really good time for being an Elixir developer. At this point, my feeling is that it's becoming a demanded technology. It's yet to be, but it's on its way. I guess recently read something about it's the first time Elixir came up on a list from a tech radar from ThoughtWorks, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
So it's the first time Elixir comes up on a list, and I feel the same, like in the past month when I was looking for a job. I was also looking for an Elixir position, and I definitely saw more openings than before. So it's something that's growing.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And you said that Elixir maybe helps you writing apps in different architectures, and I saw on your LinkedIn that you did some event sourcing at another company.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk a little bit about event sourcing? Like, what are the main advantages of doing that?
Yeah, I did some of that, like exploratory work, but with Ruby.
Oh. Did you use a framework, or did you
Yeah,
write
I was
your
pretty
own?
much on top of a Rails application. There is one library called Events or something in the Ruby community. I don't recall the name off the top of my head. But
Eventide?
No, that's another one. Yeah. But essentially, what brought me to that is working on architecture in general and trying to have independent components and going beyond composition over inheritance and that kind of principles. And in the vein of having even more decoupled components, I learned about event-driven systems first, and then that got me to event sourcing, event storming, I think is the same thing, and domain-driven design, more importantly. So yeah, we were exploring that option, and at this company I was working on before it got acquired, and leadership told me the idea, and I had green light to work on that, and I started working on low impact features using that architecture. And it was going well until the acquisition happened, and that changed priorities.
Oh, I see.
But yeah.
Yeah, my last company, we were doing event sourcing too with Elixir, and it worked pretty well for the stuff we were doing. But then you kind of have to change your mindset a little bit, because you can't just develop MVC applications anymore. Like, you have to be very careful with the events you have, the commands you're going to create.
Yeah.
And also be very careful with what you're doing. So it needs to be very obvious, like very specific. And we as developers don't have that practice, or maybe that mindset of being very sure of what you want to build. Like, what are all of the actions that the user might take, or what are all the events the system will have to process. So you kind of have to be very thorough in your design, right? And that sometimes can be challenging, because you can't just start writing something. You have to really think about the domain and the things you need to build. But then when you build it, it works, you know? This is the coolest thing about it. Like,
Yeah.
maybe you have to like rethink and change your mindset a lot, but you learn a lot of new interesting stuff with that.
Yeah, I guess that's probably why the DDD community have embedded the event storming sessions, for example. I guess that helps you to have better ideas on how to do the actual implementation of that. But yeah, I definitely agree. It's something I want to explore more in the future. It's hard, I guess, do that in existing applications. In your case, it was an existing one, or?
So we were doing the big rewrite.
Oh,
so it was a new application with a new architecture. It was hard, super hard, but I think if you have the time and maybe you create something new, like a smaller thing, a very specific thing, and you use event sourcing for that, like for a very critical part of your system,
Yeah,
I think it makes a lot of sense. Like for financial applications, for example, like stuff that shouldn't break, right? Stuff that like data shouldn't be corrupted, like things that are very important and critical. I think it works really well, but it needs to be like a small thing. If you try to do with a big thing, it's going to be hard.
Yeah, I agree totally. If I was to write a new application, I probably will try to experiment with that architecture and with Elixir.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about the future? What are you planning for the next years?
I don't know. I want to settle in a bit. It's been pretty tough the last few years. Like in doing immigration, it's hard. So that's taking a lot of energy out of me. I'm gonna settle in for a bit. I don't know how much time, but I don't have other special plans in the future other than exploring our beautiful province of British Columbia.
It is beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amed, that was a really interesting conversation. Thank you for talking to us today.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your experience. I think people will be inspired by your story, and I hope more people do Elixir and event sourcing in the future.
Yeah. That's my hope as well.
Yeah. So if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to reach out to Amed and let him know. I'm sure he would love that. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and to our newsletter so you don't miss any updates. And you can find all of that at hexdevs.com.